fiction. And mostly I do nothing but fantasy, science fiction, or not science fiction, but fantasy, swords and sort of Lord of the Rings kind of stuff. But a few years ago, I have an open door policy when it comes to characters. They can come in, tell me their stories, maybe I'll write them, maybe I won't. Well, this one introduced himself to me, and he was a vampire. I don't do vampire stories. 4 months later, I was looking at a finished vampire story. He wouldn't leave me alone. So basically the story is about all those Twilight fans. Okay, Twilight was for the teenagers. This is for their mothers. Okay? Basically the story is about Michaela von Ludwig, a Bavarian 300-year-old vampire. And he runs into a modern-day practicing witch in Pennsylvania. And first witch he's ever run into that he doesn't think is a total lunatic. And they start having conversations. And the title of the book is Deadly Conversations. And out of these conversations, they get to know each other. They keep bumping into each other, and then things get pulled in, and then she can't stop being his friend because things are a little complicated. So this is basically the first scene where they're really sitting down and getting to know each other over coffee. And he's invited her to coffee, and she's basically, they're having like taking turns filling out the details of what each one really is, you know. Okay, you're a witch, you believe in black cats. Okay, you're a vampire, do you sleep in coffins, stuff like that. So they're taking turns back and forth, figuring out who each other is. And, you know, taking care of all the myths. Okay, it starts with Michaela. My turn, he said. You've been a practicing witch how long? I sighed, thinking about it. I was not born into the craft. I guess you could say that my parents were very lax Christians. I accepted Wicca when I was 21 after much soul searching, I told him. I took another swallow of coffee. How old are you? I wondered if it was considered rude to ask a vampire's age. But Michaela only smiled as if he expected the question. He chuckled softly. In human years or vampire years, Michaela said. Both, I replied. He sighed. I watched him close his pale eyes as his mind reached back over time. I was born in the year 1663 during the War of Leopold I. I lived a normal human life until the age of 45. And then a vampire elder found me and turned me. He thought I would prove useful. Vampires had elders? This only sparked my curiosity more. He paused for a long moment, pondering his next words before continuing. Some people choose to become Nosferatu. I did not. The change was forced upon me. I would have never chosen to exist like this. He crossed his arms in front of him and with a frown and a sigh continued. Those of my kind like to think of themselves as immortal. My eyebrows hopped a bit at this. And you don't? I said. That's true, isn't it? Aren't you an immortal? His frown deepened and his eyes glittered in frustration as he shook his head in denial. I certainly am not. I can be killed. So can any vampire. We do not die peacefully of old age. Yes, there always seems to be some violence associated with our deaths. But we are not deathless beings. God is immortal. I'm something different. I prefer to think of it as having an indefinite lifespan. I nodded in agreement as my thoughts spun. Now my turn, he said, changing the topic. What tradition are you? I took another experimental sip of coffee. The flavor was starting to grow on me. I learned in a Diana coven until they got too weird for me. Then I switched to solitaire. I'm much happier now. He nodded as if in complete understanding. I leaned forward, half afraid, half compelled to ask the next question. What's it like to be what you are? I said in a voice barely above a whisper. I still had difficulty in saying the word vampire in public. He smiled and did not answer me for a long moment. Finally, he held up his hand to me. Please, take my hand, he said. I promise not to harm you. I started backwards as if stung. I tilted my head to the side, considering his request. I wasn't really sure I wanted to touch him. Do vampires honor their promises? I asked. He smiled and shrugged. Not really, he admitted. I held his glance for a long moment. He did the same to me. Just hold my hand, nothing more. His slender white fingers awaited mine, poised and eternally patient. I didn't want to take his hand, but I knew I should not take his hand, knowing what he was. But like a cat, my curiosity could not be denied, and I acquiesced. Slowly, I relented and slid my palm into his. His pale fingers wound about my own, like a python easing its grip on its prey, waiting for a breath to constrict its coils. The veins that branched across the back of his hand stood out in faint blue contrast through his deathly white skin. His grasp was gentle, though I could feel the inhuman strength that hid just below the surface. Apprehension made me swallow with difficulty. My pulse was pounding in my throat. I shouldn't have done that, I thought. Why did I do that? I had a daughter to think about. Had he charmed me into obeying him? My heart beat slow and loud in my ears, and I wondered what he would do next. I didn't have long to wait. With my hand thus ensnared, he leaned forward until he came almost within my personal space. He stopped just short of it, sensing I did not want him there. I could not pull away. I was afraid, and I felt helpless. Our eyes locked. Now, he whispered, in a tone as soft as an owl's feather. Tell me what you feel, Madam Witch. I could feel his cool breath on my skin as he spoke. I swallowed again and forced myself to obey his words, wondering why I was allowing such a thing. I steeled myself against a wave of emotions, memories that weren't mine, or urges that I should not get into, anything like that. I expected the kind of things that Hollywood would love to expound upon. But I received none of those things. Even my Wiccan senses had gone silent. There was just his pale hand, holding mine, that was flush and rosy with life. His hand felt shockingly cold, too cold for any living thing. Your hand is cold, I said. Yes, he nodded. His fingers unwound with terrible slowness from my own, releasing them. I snatched my hand back as if I wouldn't get another chance. Michaela barely reacted to this, other than to give a sad smile that seemed full of regret. I am always this way, always cold, he told me. Not just to your touch, but inside as well. A vampire's blood temperature runs much lower than a mortal. He withdrew his hand and leaned back in his chair. I sighed in relief at the increase in distance between us. He did not seem to notice my reaction. As long as we stay out of the sun, he added. The sun has the same effect on me as an allergic reaction. I will blister even in the shade and act like I have the flu. I will never get warm. I won't even sweat. I have traveled to many hot areas of the world to test this theory, and it has always been the same. He turned his eyes away from me and toyed absent-mindedly with his disposable coffee cup. It has always been this way for me ever since I was turned. I have always been cold, and because of that I yearn for warm things. A warm drink, warm bodies. Here his eyes locked into what small area of my throat was exposed. The glance was hungry and lustful. His lips parted, and for just a second I caught a glimpse of his canines that were all too sharp for his age. Warm blood, he added, and licked his lips hungrily. Yes, I really was sitting across the table from a predator, I reminded myself. I shivered inside. I thought of my daughter Bree, and what a person like this might, could, would do to her. My heart blazed at the mere thought, and my hands began to tremble. He tore his eyes away and looked at the ground as if in shame. That, my dear, is one small detail of what it is to be me, the aggravating eternal cold. Pray that you never have to experience it as I have, Michaelis told me.